The topic of racism has certainly been in the news quite a bit. In fact, the House recently heard arguments in favor of reparations for descendants of slaves. And Cory Booker has been one of the Democratic candidates who, of course, has talked about the issue of racism in America quite a bit. Now, Tucker Carlson doesn't like that. And as a result, he aired a segment that attacked Booker specifically. Take a look.
Senator Cory Booker made a guest appearance at the hearing. He claimed that the same country that has made him one of the most powerful figures in the land is in fact incorrigibly racist. Cory Booker's parents were highly paid IBM executives. He grew up in a rich, all-white neighborhood, by the way. So if white supremacy were a huge problem in America, how did Cory Booker become a senator?
So it's actually a giant misrepresentation to make it appear as though Cory Booker and his family had an easy time finding housing in a predominantly white neighborhood. In fact, if Tucker Carlson cared to actually look into what Cory Booker has been talking about during his campaign, he would know what Cory Booker is about to share with all of us right now. Take a look.
I'm literally sitting before you right now because a Republican town in New Jersey, when my parents in 1969, I was just a baby, were denied housing because of the color of our skin. They were kept being told by real estate agents that our homes were sold. It was this coalition of folks, black folks, white folks, Christians, Jews, Republicans, and Democrats. They literally did a sting operation. A white couple bid on the house after my parents were told it was sold. They set up a closing. On the closing, the white couple didn't show up. My dad did, and a lawyer who ends up getting. Literally, my father, him walked in, and the real estate agent gets up and punches my dad's lawyer in the face, sigs a dog on my dad.
There's no racism in America. I mean, he was able to live in a predominantly white neighborhood, and he's a black man who was elected into office. So that's it. That's it. I mean, yeah, we have concentration camps at the border for people who are seeking asylum. We treat Muslims and people of color as second-class citizens, but we don't have racism in America. I mean, this is such a tired, nonsensical argument. And it's amazing how many people buy into it because they'd rather feel good about themselves rather than acknowledge and confront the reality of what America is right now.
Yeah, so it also might be relevant which state he's in. So all of America didn't vote Cory Booker as senator, New Jersey did. So if Cory Booker, the same Cory Booker, African-American progressive, ran in Alabama, do you think he would have won? My guess is he would not have won. And so Tucker Carlson would say, oh no, this is because they're ideologically different than him. That would be partly true, and there would also be racial issues. So for example, why do I say that? I don't make that out of thin blue air. In just a couple of elections ago, when Obama was running, they asked in Alabama and Mississippi, are you against interracial marriage? Now that should be what, 99% the one, 100% the zero? Of course we're in favor of interracial marriage at this point, right? No, about a quarter of Republicans in Alabama and Mississippi said that it should be illegal. That black people marrying white people should be illegal. That was only a couple of elections ago. So that's not even Jim Crow, that's not slavery. So could Cory Booker win in Alabama? Hell no, he couldn't win in Alabama, right? I mean, in Alabama, Roy Moore, who is accused of being a child predator, et cetera, barely lost because he was running against a Democrat, let alone on the issue of race. By the way, Doug Jones did a great job of representing African-American families, and I don't know if that counted against him. I don't know if that's why the election was so close. So just saying Cory Booker is a senator somewhere does not mean all of America is not racist or none of America is racist.
Yeah,
it's preposterous.
They love to point to, first of all, again, he lied about what Cory Booker's life experience was, what his family's experience was, didn't even care to look into that. But that's what he decided to cite as an excuse for, or as an argument that there's no racism in America. But they also avoid study after study. And so I wanna bring a few of them up right now. There's the study that we bring up quite a bit when it comes to marijuana use. So even though studies indicate that black individuals and white individuals use marijuana at the same rate, black people are 4 times more likely to be prosecuted for marijuana possession. that we bring that up quite a bit. Now, I want to give you some more studies. 24 studies with 30 estimates of discrimination for Black and Latino Americans, collectively representing more than 54,000 applications submitted for more than 25,000 positions, concluded that on average, white applicants receive 36% more callbacks than equally qualified African Americans, while white applicants receive on average 24% more callbacks than Latinos. No racism in America, though. I'm sure racism has nothing to do with that.
So look, this is an easy way to trick people that don't know the facts. They point to one successful African American and go, "So problem solved." Mitch McConnell just did it the other day. Well, Obama was elected president, so what problem solved? So no, just because one African American succeeded in a big way in the case of Obama or Booker does not mean that the statistics overall bear out that there are no discrimination issues in America. So now here, let me give you another fact. Black households have about 7% of the wealth of an average white household. Now, if you ask white Americans what they think that number is, they know that blacks have less money than whites overall, but they guess that blacks have 80% of the wealth of white people in this country, because people like Tucker Carlson and Ben Shapiro saying nonstop, it's BS. They're about in the same boat. No, they don't. It's not 80%. It's 7%. 7% of what white households start with. Why? So it's because, first of all, until slavery, I don't know if you know this, fairly easy to look up, they were not allowed to own any property. They were property, considered property in law. So that's a little like sickening to even say out loud. But so white folks in this country had a bit of a head start in that sense. Maybe they could have caught up since then if there was a Jim Crow. But for 100 years, they said you're not allowed to have these jobs, you're not allowed to vote, you're not allowed to live in these areas, and it's systemic discrimination against them until the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. Then we begin to get into the ball game, but then redlining starts. And so 2/3, for example, 2/3 of the wealth of any family in America, no matter what their race, is based on your house, the property value, right? But for a lot of African Americans, they weren't even allowed to own homes, even in the North. So they would do redlining. And even the government helped that systemic discrimination even past Jim Crow and said you are not allowed to give loans to African Americans. Well, then if you can't get a loan, then you can't get a house, and then you can't get any wealth. And when you start out at the bottom, it makes it so much harder to move up. Guys, you know this, because if you're a poor or a middle-class white person in this country, it's very likely that your family was poor or middle class. It's not like, hey, you were all born rich and all of a sudden because you're a bum, you became poor. That might happen to a tiny, tiny percentage. But overall, if you're a poor person in America who's white, probably it's because your family was poor. It's not because you were a bum. And so
one of the stories,
that's why that systemic discrimination throughout has put African Americans in a greatly disadvantageous position. And that's what we're trying to point out, while the other side is demagoguing.
Look, I mean, it wasn't too long ago. It was in 2017, just a few years ago. There was a hate march in Charlottesville, Virginia, where you have white nationalists and neo-Nazis chanting, "The Jews will not replace us." These are people who believe that there is white genocide in America. And a counter-protester was run over by a car and murdered by a member of the so-called alt-right. So please do not lecture Americans about how this country has no race issues. It certainly does. And one other thing I wanted to bring up, it's a story in the news today that I hope we get to later today in the show. But in Philadelphia, 75 police officers were just put on administrative leave because of racist posts on social media. And in St. Louis, 22 officers were just put on administrative leave for the exact same reason. We have a race problem in America. Wakey, wakey. Let's stop pretending as if this is the greatest country in the world, because right now we have a lot of issues that we need to fix before we can call ourselves that.
And so one last thing about why we've had this systemic discrimination leading to the great disparity in wealth and hence lack of opportunity for African Americans. Over a lifetime, Americans with a college degree earn 84% more than those with a high school degree. So it makes a huge difference whether you have an education. So when I was in South Carolina, I visited a plantation. And one of the rules that they had on the plantation was the slaves are not allowed to learn anything. They're not allowed to get an education. and they're not allowed to learn how to read. So for a long time in this country, it was literally illegal for African Americans to get an education. During the Jim Crow years, there's another 100 years where there was segregation and no funding for their schools and miserable conditions. So when you have them at this massive, disproportionate disadvantage where they don't have access to wealth, that's denied to them by the banks, by the government, and then education is denied on top. And then you wonder why we have the system that we have now. And then guys like Tucker Carlson go on air and go, I found one black person that's successful in America. Racism is solved. Look away from all the systemic problems that created the mess that we're in today. And then you'll understand why it's a trick what the right wing does.